So here's our big idea for today, and we'll say this a few more times as we work our way through the passage. Because God's power alone produces covenant faithfulness, knowledge, and life, we must continually cling to his grace. Now, before we go any further, I want us to just remind us of a few things, maybe get you caught up if you haven't been with us for this series. You're going to hear the word covenant a lot today, so I thought, we should probably define what that is. There's different ways we could do that, but just as a working definition for today, a covenant in the Bible is a formal binding agreement that involves promises, obligations, and consequences that are often a matter of life and death. But today, as we think about the covenant that God has made with his people, I want us to think about two really important concepts first: participants and power. Today, we're going to see God, through Moses, call Israel, call his people, to choose life through being faithful to the covenant that God has with them. But thankfully for us and for them, we're going to see that although God calls his people to participate in a covenant relationship, he alone will be the power which accomplishes the blessings of that covenant. So think of it this way. There's going to be some definitions on the screen behind me. What is a participant, and how do we think about power? Our participant is someone who takes part in, shares in, or is actively involved in an activity, event, or relationship. But power we think of as the ability or capacity to act, influence, or produce an effect. It's the strength or authority to accomplish a purpose. So in the covenant relationship between God and his people, God's people participate, God's power produces. God's people participate, but God's power produces. I'll give you a couple of illustrations just to think about this as we get started today. First, think about a small child, maybe a 2 or 3-year-old, that sees a parent doing something around the house, they're working on a project, and they have a nail and a hammer. And this 2-year-old really wants to use this nail and hammer. But if you've ever seen a 2-year-old, you know that's not going to end well. They're not going to produce or accomplish the intended result. So what often can happen is this: a parent can say, I want you to participate in this with me. The parent will hold the nail. The child will place their hand on the hammer. The parent, if they are wise, will put their hand on top of the child's hand, holding the hammer, and they will nail the nail as they should, and it accomplishes the intended purpose. In that scenario, the child is absolutely a participant. The parent absolutely is the power accomplishing the goal. I was reminded of this, if you want to take it a little more of a spiritual direction. Just last week, Seth was preaching, and if you're in our app, you can see the sermon notes like all the way through to the end. And I looked down and I saw that Seth was going to use a verse from Deuteronomy 30, the text that I'm preaching from this morning. And I leaned over to my wife, Kaylee, and I said, Seth is going to steal my thunder for my sermon next week. Without blinking, she leaned over and goes, good thing it's God's thunder, not yours. So I got humbled on the text I'm about to preach. I am a participant in this right now, right? I am participating in the act of preaching. But it is God's truth that hopefully I'm sharing with you. It is his goodness and beauty that I hope you see. It is his spirit that has the power to accomplish any kind of change in you and I. I am a participant in preaching right now, but God is the power. We're going to see this dynamic play out over and over again in Deuteronomy chapter 30. So again, big idea, because God's power alone produces covenant faithfulness, knowledge, and life, we must continually cling to his grace.